Hey Nature School, how's it going? It's Mr. Mike, and today we're talking about something super special and something that only really happens one time a year, and that's maple sugaring. So I'm going to take you guys on a little adventure, and we're going to learn how to tap trees. We're going to learn how to collect the sap. We're going to learn how to boil the sap. We're going to learn how to finish it all the way down to make maple syrup. So let's get going. All right guys, so here are going to be some of the things that you're going to need to tap your maple trees. So the first thing you're going to need is a drill of some sort. You can use a hand auger, but a good old power drill works really easy and is much quicker. You're going to need a hammer. You're probably wondering why. Well, we're going to need this to tap in our spile, like this. So we're using a bag system here. So basically what will happen is this tap will sit here, and I'll just be able to tip it and tilt it right into the bucket and travel on my way and not have to move a bunch of stuff around a lot. All right, so let's tap this tree. So first we're going to start off with a drill. Now we're going to use a 5/16 drill bit, and you don't want to go really any further than 1 inch into the tree. Space, we'll go right about here where it looks comfortable, and we're going to do a slight angle upwards. You're probably wondering why. So if we go down and face the tap like this, facing downward, that's going to be problematic because then your sap's going to pull up down there in the bottom. And if you go straight in, sometimes it'll just sit there. So we want a nice flow. Now when I say an angle, I'm talking a very slight angle, and some of these spiles are even angled like this one here. So a slight angle upwards, and you don't want to drill as hard as you possibly can into this tree, and we'll just start slow, getting through the bark. Then we'll pull it out. So, and then you saw how I pulled that out. The reason I do that is because I want that tap hole to be clean. I don't want. And there's our freshly drilled hole, and you can see that thing running already. We have about a 40-degree day, so it should run pretty well today. Nice little tap. It's already dripping pretty heavy. Now we're going to get that spile in there. Little bags are tricky. Alright, so just give it a couple. Alright, so I didn't hit that very hard, and that's in there nice and firm. And then we'll start to see a little drip here, and we'll be good to go. So as you guys can see, tapping is pretty easy. It's not even the hard part. It's the most intensive in terms of taking equipment out into the field, but in terms, this might be the easiest part of the job. One of the most difficult parts of the job is usually collection because it's the most labor intensive. Now some people might disagree with me and say boiling off is the most labor intensive, but we'll show you why that's not always so bad. So let's get moving and learn a little bit about collection. All right, so now you're probably wondering, Mike, why do we have to wait for a certain temperature? Well, what you need for the sap to flow through the trees is you need about 40 to 45 during the day. You can get 35 and get a little bit of sap production, and you need below freezing at night. Not like 20 below. You need right around 32 to 23. Probably your lowest you want to hit, and then you're going to need a really warm day. And what happens is in the tree there are xylem and phloem layers that pass nutrients and water and all kinds of stuff throughout the tree. So once that begins to happen, there's going to be a pressure buildup from gases like nitrogen and things that are inside of the tree. Once that pressure begins to build, then it'll force the liquid or the sap down the tree and out your spile through your sapwood layer, and then you have your sap. So what we're going to do now is we are going to head home, and then we'll come back tomorrow morning, see what sap production we've got, and we'll check the next day too and see how it did, and then we'll collect sap, and after we collect sap, then we'll go through the boiling process. All right, let's go. All right, so here's my 3-tube system. I got one coming straight from the back, one on the side, and one on the other side. So it's pretty simple. Now you're probably wondering, hey Mike, why are all your tubings blue and your bags blue? Well, it's pretty easy. When UV light passes through this tubing, it doesn't allow the formation of bacteria to happen as fast. So it doesn't prevent it, but it just slows that down. So as the sun's coming in, you have those warmer days, and the sap might sit a little longer. It helps to preserve it just a little bit longer than it would be clear tubing. Pretty nifty little trick that they came up with. It's also fascinating how far maple sugaring has come in such a short time. Alright guys, we're here in the South Woods at Osborne Metro Park, and we're ready to collect some sap. Now here's where the hard work comes in. Alright, so it might seem pretty simple, sap collection, but as you can see, I have two 5-gallon buckets here. And this bag right here looks pretty full. I'd say there's about 2.5 to 3 gallons of sap just right here on this bag. And it varies from tree to tree, as I'd mentioned earlier when we were tapping. Each tree can give a varying amount of sap, from 1 gallon to 3 gallons, and sometimes some of your better producing trees that have 4 taps in them can give you up to 5 gallons. Now on average, most taps give you between 1 and 2 gallons per running day. So that means when there's optimal or ideal temperatures, so below freezing at night and above freezing during the day in the 40s and 50s, we can come out here sometimes and these bags will be completely full. That's one of our biggest ones so far. It's about 4 gallons right there. These bags, when they're stretched to capacity, can hold close to 7. We don't want them to do that because the weight on the tree is pulling on that spile, and it wouldn't be good for the tree. So we try to get them off as quick as we can. But nice clear sap is what you want to see. If you see anything floating in there that's, for example, kind of cloudy, or you start to see black on the sides like mold, that's no good. You got to throw that sap out because it could spoil the rest of your syrup. So nice and clear, as we can see here, you can see through it. You don't see anything cloudy. And another sign is if you smell kind of a moldy or a sour smell to the sap, you'll know that, hey, that sap's no good, we'll dump it out and try again. Then if it happens again, then it's best to switch your bag or clean out your bucket. Alright, so as we had mentioned, there is a filtration process that we go through. I have 3 parts. One part that's done here to catch all the big stuff like bugs and things like that. And if you look closely, you can see there's plenty of those in there. We just run it through a cheesecloth, and the cheesecloth catches all the big stuff. And then later when we get to the boiling process, at the end, there is a 2-part filtration process that catches all the smaller particulates and things that we might not be able to see. So let's get going. All right, nature school. Now this is where all of the work comes in to boiling. So what we have here is an evaporator pan, and this evaporator pan is done outside, and we boil all of the sap in this pan for about somewhere between 8 to 10 hours depending on the weather, how cold the sap is, if it has ice on it. So overall, this is the most time consuming. Labor intensive, like we had mentioned, is the collection process. Then we have the boiling process. So this part is just a sitting and waiting and watching game. You're adding wood, you're watching the boil, make sure it doesn't get too high or over top of the pan, and then you are moving around, skimming foam off of the top. So if you see over there in the corner, what we do is we skim that foam because sometimes bugs and things get caught in there, and there's also a substance called niter, which is like a fine sand, and we remove that fine sand before, so when we get to our last filtration process we don't really have to worry about taking it off. So it's a pretty simple process and pretty much a waiting game. So over time you'll be able to see the color change. So it still looks pretty clear, it has a little tint to it, but after this gets down to about 2 gallons, we're boiling down about 40 gallons, then we'll take this inside and we'll show you the rest of the process from there. Because this is a pretty simple, easy waiting game process. All right, guys, so now we've moved the process inside. Now this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, but we're getting super close to having a final product. So what we have to do now is we have to use a couple of tools. Number one, candy thermometer. The reason why we have to use a candy thermometer and not some other type of thermometer is because this can take extremely high temperatures up to 400 degrees. We're going to be somewhere between 215 and 222. The next thing you're going to need, and this helps pretty much every person who maple sugars. Some people can do it by eye. I've had enough practice that I could do it by eye, but I still rely on the hydrometer to determine how much liquid is in our sap. So here is our hydrometer, and here's our little testing tube. So what happens is you'll put the syrup inside of here, and as you put that in, you will slowly put this in, and it will give you a percentage based on how much water is left inside of that syrup. But this is super important. So when you have it on your stove inside or outside, it's really important to never walk away from this. They can boil over, and if you've ever seen sugar scorch before on the stove or whether anywhere, it can be extremely dangerous. So it's best to never walk away from your sap or always be close by. So if you can see here, our sap is boiling right about 216, 217 is where we are. Oh no, we're a little low. We might crank up the heat on that one. So after this, then we will get it down to where we want it, and then we'll walk through the next step, which is a filtration step, and we'll talk about that. All right? All right, Nature School, we're about to filter our final product. Right here, I have a two-step filtration process. There's a felt sock on a stand that I made, and there's also almost like a coffee filter that I'm inserting here. And this inserted coffee filter will help catch other things too and not mess up the sock too bad. As you can also see, there's a pot underneath for when you're switching out jars so you don't get syrup all over the floor, and the pot there can catch that, and you can still save that syrup, heat it back up, and dump it back through the sock if you want. Pretty simple process, and we'll show you how it works. Now this part's very important. You have to make sure if you're using glass jars, that your glass jars are heated to the same temperature that the sap's going to be, or higher, so that we don't have broken glass all over the floor, and you're going to lose your syrup too. So be careful. So now we're dumping the hot syrup through the felt sock. It's going to catch all the extra stuff that we don't want in our syrup, but this process moves very, very quickly, so check it out. All right, so this process is going to move very, very quickly as we filter through the felt sock. Now, as it's filtering through, it almost looks like water or like a brown water, but that sap is extremely hot when it comes off the stove. It's about 215 degrees, so you have to be very quick when moving the jars. As you can see, we spill over here just a little bit as we're swapping jars, and that jar has to be hot the entire time. And then this process will keep happening, and we'll keep swapping jars out as we move along. So in total, we made about 7 pints. So that's almost a gallon. 8 pints would be a gallon. So we came up just a little bit short. We do have things like spillage, and when we're moving things from outside to inside, sometimes we do lose a little bit of sap, but that's okay. So it was a pretty good run for our first run. All right, Nature School, I hope you guys had an awesome time hanging out with me and learning about maple sugaring, and how if you guys wanted to try it with your parents or grandparents or somebody, that you guys could do it too. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.